Residential report writing and case studies. McKissock Continuing Education. Chapter 1. Appraising versus Reporting. Page 1. Course Overview. We encourage our customers to visit the FAQs section for further information regarding your educational experience. They have complete step-by-step tutorials that we've designed with you in mind. Please note, upon completion of the final exam, you will need to advance to the survey page and complete the survey. Once that is done, the course will be marked as complete in our system and credit may be issued. Course description. An appraisal report is both the final step and critical element in the appraisal process. One that can successfully or unsuccessfully communicate your findings to a client. In this course, your instructor will introduce you to some of the techniques and procedures associated with writing a proper appraisal report, as well as guide you through the various reporting options available, including narrative type reports. Foundational requirements for these reports are taken from USPAP and intended users such as Fannie Mae and HUD. This course also features interactive case studies which require you to write parts of 2 appraisal reports, one on a single family dwelling and the other on a 3-unit residential income property. There is a mandatory 1-hour proctored exam at the end that must be taken in a monitored setting. A calculator is recommended for this course. Course learning objectives. Upon completion of this course, participants will be able to differentiate between an appraisal and an appraisal report, compare and contrast standards 1 and 2, recognize the steps in the appraisal process, prepare an overview of the approaches to value, identify basic appraisal reporting requirements, identify the basic requirements for an appraisal report and a restricted appraisal report, define assumptions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, and their corresponding reporting requirements. Identify the 2 reporting options from Standards Rule 2-2 and the uses and applicability of each. Explain the differences between the 2 reporting options. Identify and articulate some pitfalls of using forms to report appraisals. Identify the minimum content requirements for an appraisal report. Identify areas where commonly used form reports may not provide sufficient information to comply with USPAP requirements. Outline USPAP requirements for disclosure of prior services provided regarding the subject property. Identify the difference between a form and a report. Explain why correctly filled out appraisal forms do not equate to USPAP compliance. Summarize how USPAP compliance for appraisal reports is determined. Outline the uses and limitations of the URAR form. Explain the purpose of the UAD and who is responsible for compliance. Identify report forms that are required to be UAD compliant. Describe how UAD requirements are viewed under USPAP. Summarize the difference between requirements and instructions. Apply sales comparison, cost approach, and reconciliation techniques. Recognize disclosure requirements for scope of work. Give examples of disclosures related to property inspection. Identify assignment conditions and how they affect scope of work and disclosure. Recognize disclosure requirements for jurisdictional exemption. Summarize the use of narrative type reports. Identify tips and best practices for formatting and writing narrative reports. Identify various Fannie Mae/Freddie Mac appraisal reporting forms and their applications. Describe differences between the URAR form and other commonly used report forms. Discuss the use of addendum and reinspection forms that are not appraisal report forms. Identify specific UAD data entry requirements. Chapter 1, Appraising versus Reporting, page 2, Chapter Overview. Chapter Overview. As you undoubtedly know, this 15-hour course is part of the required core curriculum to become a licensed residential appraiser or a certified residential appraiser. In Chapter 1, we will distinguish between the appraisal development and appraisal reporting processes. Although development and reporting are both part of the overall appraisal process, they are separate functions which are covered by different standards in USPAP. Chapter 1, Learning Objectives. Upon completion of this chapter, participants will be able to differentiate between an appraisal and an appraisal report. Compare and contrast standards 1 and 2. Recognize the steps in the appraisal process. Prepare an overview of the approaches to value. Identify basic appraisal reporting requirements. Page 3, Appraising versus Reporting. Introduction. Before we discuss what is required of an appraiser when preparing an appraisal report, it is important to understand the difference between an appraisal and an appraisal report. The following definitions are found in the current edition of the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Throughout this course, all quotations from USPAP appear in blue italics. Appraisal, noun. The act or process of developing an opinion of value. An opinion of value, adjective, of or pertaining to appraising and related functions such as an appraisal practice or appraisal services. Report. Any communication, written or oral, of an appraisal or appraisal review that is transmitted to the client or a party authorized by the client upon completion of an assignment. Small letters Appraisal Foundation, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, Washington, D.C., Appraisal Standards Board, 2020 through 2021, edition, definitions, end of page. Page 4, appraising versus reporting. What's the difference? An appraisal is an intellectual process in which an appraiser forms an opinion of value. On the other hand, the appraisal report is the communication of the appraisal or value opinion which the appraiser has formed. These two terms are not synonymous. An appraisal is not a report, and a report is not an appraisal. When we refer to an appraisal in this course, we are specifically talking about an opinion of value concerning real property. Although USPAP covers personal property and intangible property as well, all discussions of appraisal and appraisal reporting in this course will be in the context of real property only. Also, the reporting requirements that we will cover in this course are applicable to written appraisal reports. USPAP permits oral appraisal reports as well, and we will briefly address requirements for oral reports later in this course. End of page. Page 5, making the distinction. This course is intended to address appraisal reporting, but you cannot escape the appraisal development process in any discussion of appraisal reporting. Therefore, some coverage of appraisal development versus reporting is warranted. For residential appraisers, the distinction between appraising development and reporting may perhaps be a little blurry. If this is true for you, it may be because residential appraisers, in particular, tend to be very software and form focused. We are often appraising, developing our opinion of value, while at the same time working in our appraisal software, generating our report in a particular form or format. So the development and reporting processes seem to blend into each other in our daily appraisal practice. There is nothing wrong with this, by the way. It is essential to understand the difference between appraising and reporting. The appraisal standards established by USPAP address these functions separately. Standard 1 covers real property appraisal development, and Standard 2 covers real property appraisal reporting. A comparison of USPAP Standard 1 development to Standard 2 reporting shows us that these two standards have much in common, and this should not come as a surprise. If a particular factor or issue is crucial to the appraisal development process, it makes sense that it would be necessary to inform our client slash intended users of this important factor or issue in the appraisal report. Essentially, the report is the appraiser's sole means of communicating the critical aspects of the appraisal process. Including assignment results to the client and other intended users. If an issue or approach is essential in the development of an opinion of value, omitting that issue or approach from the appraisal report would likely be considered misleading. Before we move on, it's time for a short quiz. End of page. Page 6. Check your understanding. This quiz has a total of 3 questions. There will be 1 question per page. You must achieve 66% to pass this quiz. All right. Start quiz. Number 1. Question 1 of 3. There is no difference between the meanings of the terms appraisal and appraisal report. I'm going to go false. Page 6. Question 2 of 3. In the development of an appraisal on a 2-unit residential property, Jared completes the income approach. Which statement is true regarding his reporting obligations? He may omit the approach from his report as long as there is nothing worth reporting. I'm thinking that's false. He must report the results of the income approach. That sounds true. He may omit the approach from both his report and his work file. That sounds false. And none of these answers. That sounds false. I'm going to go with he must report the results of the income approach. Question 3 of 3. The appraisal development process is governed by Standard 2, is an intellectual process, must be reported in writing, communicates the value opinion to the client. go with is governed by standard 2. I'm not 100% on this one though. Assignment completed. You've reached the end of this assessment. Click Finish below to see the results, or use the previous button to go back and review your answers. I'm going to go to Finish. $66.7. You scored a 66.7. You needed 66% to win. There's a continue button. Below this is 1/27/2020. Date completed 1/27/2020. Time spent 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Review chapter info. Take review quiz. All questions. Correct questions and incorrect questions. Okay. Question 1 of 3. There is no difference between the meanings of the terms appraisal and appraisal report. I put false. You answered correctly. Question 2 of 3. In the development of an appraisal on a 2-unit residential property, Jared completes the income approach. Which statement is true regarding his reporting obligations? You put, he must report the results of the income approach. You answered correctly. And question 3 of 3. The appraisal development process, the answer is an intellectual process. That is the answer. It is not. Is governed by standard 2. That's what you put before, so you got that one wrong. You answered that one incorrectly. Appraisal is an intellectual process whereby an appraiser forms an opinion of value. Chapter 1, Appraising versus Reporting.